Welcome back to our series on Scottish Church history. And the previous session we looked at home mission, particularly looking at Edinburgh as a model of reaching the whole city with the gospel as Christians work together in so many different ways. Well, now we're going to look at world mission from Scotland. In 1910, Edinburgh was chosen to host the World Missionary Conference, to which over 1,200 church leaders and missionaries were invited. Although two smaller gatherings had occurred in London in 1888 and in New York in 1900, this was the most significant event for the Protestant world missionary cause in history. Why was Edinburgh chosen? It was seen as the evangelical capital of the world and as the evangelical mission centre of the world at this time. This is because the churches had worked together so efficiently that most of Scotland had been reached. And then they had set up missionary training bases for equipping and sending hundreds of missionaries abroad. But why had it taken so long to seek to fulfill the Great Commission? Well, we had to get our house in order as a church. We look at the first part. The church had been corrupted during the medieval period at the time of the Roman Catholic Church. And so we had to see a reformation to get back to a more biblical understanding. Secondly, the Reformation and Covenanting periods of the 16th and 17th centuries were all about getting the church back into biblical order in the face of horrendous trials and persecution. The philosophy of the moderates in the Church of Scotland had to be overcome, which was against world mission. An example of the response by a leading liberal churchman, that is the Reverend John Hope, was after the Church Assembly of 1824, when it was voted by the leaders to focus on world mission. We had a dose, he said, of fanaticism, such as I suppose has not been heard of in the General Assembly since the restoration of Charles II. So it gives you the idea just how often the Liberals were opposed to world mission. And lastly, the British Empire meant that doors were opening up everywhere for missionaries to take the gospel abroad. So this was a great opportunity as nations were opening up for the spread of the gospel. The modern origin of Scottish world mission really begins with the SSPCK, which is the Scottish Society for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge, founded in 1701 in Edinburgh, but given a royal charter in 1709. The George Whitfield revival at Cambuslang near Glasgow in 1742 had a significant effect as well. And then also there was the Reverend Dr. John Erskine at the 1796 General Assembly. And later Dr. Thomas Chalmers and the majority evangelical support at the 1824 General Assembly. Here are some of the examples of missionaries sent abroad in the 19th century and the impact that they had. First, we look at Europe and Robert Haldane, who lived in Edinburgh. He was the eldest son of aristocratic parents and inherited their estates in Gleneagles and Airthry. In 1795, he was converted to Christ, and his brother James was converted a little earlier. Robert read reports of William Carey in India and was ready to sell his vast estates to support mission there and be a missionary himself. However, the East India Company blocked missionaries going there at the time, so he focused with his brother James on preaching the gospel in Scotland. 85 churches were planted through their work. And they also set up preaching tabernacles in cities, including the one on George IV Bridge, now the United Reformed Church, which James ran until 1851. Robert set up theological seminaries in Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Dundee, and sent out 300 missionaries. He lived at times in his own house in Edinburgh as a base. In 1816, he went to Geneva and was shocked to see the terrible state of the Protestant church there. He began sharing the gospel with theology students, and soon 25 to 30 were coming to his private flat for teaching 3 times a week. Many were converted to Christ, and revival broke out. They took the gospel throughout Switzerland, France, Germany, Belgium, Holland, and the Scandinavian countries. Key leaders came out of this movement, such as Louis Gousson, who founded the Evangelical School of Theology in Geneva, César Millan, the Monod brothers, and Merle d'Aubigné, who wrote the history of the Reformation. In 1817 to 1819, Robert Haldane had a similar experience in Montauban, France, with mission bursting out in Europe throughout the work there. When we look at India, there was a very special connection between Scotland and this extraordinary nation. Alexander Duff was sent out to Calcutta. He's actually buried in the Grange Cemetery in Edinburgh, and he lectured at New College, also in this city. He was born of farming family in Moulin in Perthshire, and later studied under Dr. Chalmers at St. Andrews. He was the first Church of Scotland missionary to go to India in 1829. His vision was to implement Chalmers' model of a Christian worldview to India, which meant he set up a college of excellence with courses in science, the arts and philosophy, alongside theology, all from a Christian perspective. Other missionaries focused on the untouchables and the poor, whereas he focused on reaching the leaders and the intellectuals of the nation, believing that in time India could be transformed from the top down. He established the Scottish Church College and the University of Calcutta, which also led to India's first medical college, and partially fulfilled his vision of 1. Changing education policy in the Indian government, 2. Establishing education as a viable means of evangelism, and 3. Bringing the Christian worldview and gospel to a high caste society of Hindus. Many Hindus were converted and had a good influence in the nation. But he also discovered Hinduism is very slippery. Many other Hindus embraced the Christian ideas and Western education and mixed it with their own Hinduism. Some who studied at the college went on to convert the West to Hinduism, such as Swami Vivekananda, the interfaith pioneer, Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi, and Swami Prabhupada, who pioneered the Hare Krishna movement. However, more good came out of it as education and healthcare were developed, and the door was opened for many other missionaries to also come to India. In time, many Hindus were converted, with a good number becoming church leaders. Duff's work also established a model for many others to copy, thus impacting the world far beyond India. And then there was John Wilson of Bombay, who studied at Edinburgh University. He was born of a farming family in Lauder. He went with his wife Margaret to Bombay in 1829 and founded a church college there, since called Wilson College in Mumbai, and was instrumental in pioneering Bombay University in 1857, which is now called Mumbai University. Margaret pioneered schools for girls, and also West India's first girls' boarding school, now called St. Columba's High School. John was a keen archaeologist and worked with the government to preserve India's heritage, setting up the Archaeological Survey of India in 1861, and was the president of the Asiatic Society of Bombay. Many of his students went on to become prime ministers, politicians, scientists, and so on. Like Duff, he followed Chalmers' model, had good results long term. Another Scottish missionary to India was John Anderson of Madras. He also studied at Edinburgh University. He was the son of farming parents in Galloway and went to Edinburgh University to study under Dr. Chalmers. In 1836, he was ordained and went to Madras in the same year. With his wife, he developed a small school founded by 2 Church of Scotland chaplains in Egmore into a proper school, and also his wife pioneered education for girls. William Miller also studied at Edinburgh University, and he went to Madras to build on Anderson's work. He transformed the school into Madras Christian College in 1877, with dormitories also being built. He also opened up the college to other church denominations and helped unity in the growing churches in India. Besides this, he trained up Christian leaders and also leaders who would see democracy start to become a reality in India. Many Hindus were converted through this ministry. John Mack was another one who studied at Edinburgh University. He went out to India in 1821 to be the professor of chemistry at Serampore College, founded by William Carey. He was supported by Charlotte Chapel in Edinburgh. In 1832, he was ordained at Serampore with William Carey and Joshua Marshman and became the co-pastor of the church pioneered there. When Carey died in 1834, he became the principal of Serampore College, which blossomed under his leadership and went on to impact India. Senate of Serampore College is India's oldest university from 1829, and the Theological College is affiliated with it. Hundreds of church leaders have been trained up, as well as influencers for the government and the culture of India. Scotland also produced key missionaries who went out to China. There was Robert Morrison. Morrison was trained in mission theology at Gosport Academy by David Bogue. David Bogue himself had trained in Edinburgh, and he moved to England to disciple others in mission theology. Dr. Robert Morrison was the first Protestant missionary to China in 1807, and he translated the Bible into Chinese for the very first time, and also produced the first Chinese dictionary. Besides this, he founded the Anglo-Chinese College at Malacca. At least 10 Chinese were converted and baptized through him, but his Bible translation was a key point in establishing the church in China. He also prepared the Korean vocabulary for the missionaries who came later. William Chalmers Burns was another key missionary who went out to China. He was converted at Edinburgh University, and he was born in Kilsyth. He went to study law at the University of Edinburgh, where he was converted. He walked back home to tell his parents that he had become a Christian, and he wanted to become a minister. After theological training in Aberdeen and Glasgow, he found himself in a revival in Kilsyth in 1839. The same happened at St. Peter's in Dundee in the Free Church when the minister Robert Murray McShane was on a mission trip in Palestine. In 1847, Burns went to China as a missionary and mentored Hudson Taylor there, and helping to inspire Taylor to pioneer China Inland Mission. Burns was put into jail for his faith in China, but was used by God to see a breakthrough amongst the Chinese. A statement in Kilsyth by his mother sums up this man's passion for the lost as he wept, "Oh, mother, mother, the thud of these Christless feet on their way to hell is breaking my heart." Eric Liddell was famous as a missionary. He lived in Edinburgh and he studied at Edinburgh University. He studied science at Edinburgh University and was a famous athlete who won the gold medal in the 1924 Olympics in the 400 metres and refused to run the 100 metres sprint on the Sabbath. Later, he became a missionary leader in China and ended up in a Japanese prisoner of war camp where he died of a brain tumour. When the news came out of his death, all of Scotland mourned. He was made famous more recently through the film Chariots of Fire. And then in Taiwan, there was James Laidlaw Maxwell, who studied medicine at Edinburgh University. He pioneered the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan in 1865, which is the largest Protestant denomination there, and also healthcare. He and his sons established the first hospital in Taiwan called Sin Lau Hospital. George Leslie Mackay was another one who studied at Edinburgh University. He came from Canada of Scottish stock and was trained in mission theology by Alexander Duff at New College, Edinburgh. Mackay founded the Oxford College for training ministers in Taiwan and also developed education there and pioneered schools that taught science, medicine, and the arts from a biblical worldview. Mackay Memorial Hospital was built in his honour in 1912. It was said of him, the Bible and the forceps went together. And then there was John Ross, who was trained in Edinburgh and retired in that city and was buried there. He was born in Ballantor, north of Inverness, and his father was a tailor and mother a teacher. Ross was trained at the Theological Hall in Edinburgh and went to Manchuria in China in 1872 and settled in Mukden. He produced the Mandarin Primer and the Korean Primer. His ministry was key in missiology because he concentrated on training Chinese converts to plant other churches right from the beginning, from Mukden to Yingkou. It was in Manchuria that the first Chinese revival broke out later in 1908 to 1909 through the Canadian Jonathan Goforth, making a deep impact on many parts of China. Goforth had trained at Knox College in Toronto, which had been founded through the Free Church connections with Edinburgh at the 1843 disruption. John Ross was also the first person to translate the New Testament into Korean, with Scotsman John McIntyre and some Korean converts in China. In 1882, their Gospels of Luke and John had been distributed amongst the Koreans, and at least 5 churches sprang up in Korea as a result, before the American missionaries arrived there in 1884. The first known Protestant church came through John Ross's convert, Seo Lang Ryun, with his brother Seo Sang-u in 1884. It was established in the village of Sorai in the Hwanghae province. John Ross retired in Edinburgh and was an elder at Mayfield United Free Church. He is buried in Newington Cemetery in Edinburgh. Probably the most famous missionary to go from Scotland was David Livingstone, who went to Africa. He was a member of the Edinburgh Medical Missionary Society, which was once in the Cowgate. David Livingstone grew up in a poor family in Blantyre near Glasgow. He studied medicine at Anderson's College, now the University of Strathclyde, and at the University of Glasgow, and became a doctor in 1840. Inspired by the missionary Robert Moffat, on leave from South Africa, and by Buxton's challenge to root out slavery in Africa, he joined LMS, that's London Missionary Society, and went out there. He began exploring and mapping out the land, using his medical skills and also sharing the gospel. London Missionary Society said he was there just to preach and did not understand he was paving the way for others to come. He fell out with LMS and became employed by the British government, who funded him as an explorer. He tried to find the source of the River Nile and was influential in closing down Africa's main Arab slave market in Zanzibar in Tanzania in 1873. A cathedral was built on the actual spot where the slave market used to be. He only saw one convert, a chief called Seychelles of the Kwima tribe of Botswana, but this chief became an evangelist who saw many Africans become Christians. They were discipled by later missionaries. Livingstone's great adventure and heroism inspired generations of missionaries. There was a famous quote. He said, "I'm prepared to go anywhere, provided it be forward." He married Mary, the daughter of missionary Robert Moffat. When Zambia became independent in 1964, all towns were given African names except for one, Livingstone, showing their great respect and love of the Scottish missionary. Robert Laws was another Scottish missionary who went out to Africa. He studied at Edinburgh United Presbyterian Theological Hall. He went to Malawi from the Free Church and established Livingstonia in 1875, named after David Livingstone. This became a quality college for education in trade, commerce, agriculture, industry, teaching, accounting, engineering, entrepreneurship, and general subjects. By 1897, there were 302 pupils. Again, a Christian worldview was taught, alongside everything else. When he left in 1927, there were 700 primary schools and some secondary schools with 44,000 pupils altogether, as well as a theological seminary and healthcare. He also left a church of 60,000 African converts who spread the gospel throughout Central Africa. Livingstonia University, founded in 2003, came out of his vision. Robert Moffat was given an honorary Doctor of Divinity by Edinburgh University for his work in Africa. He was of humble parentage in Ormiston near Tranent. When he went out with London Missionary Society in 1816, he had a big impact in South Africa. He translated the whole Bible and Pilgrim's Progress into Setswana. His daughter Mary married David Livingstone. He was based at Kuruman amongst the Botswana people. In 1829, The breakthrough came after many trials, and other tribes came to request his teaching. Mary Slessor was a well-known missionary from Scotland who went to Africa. She was trained in Edinburgh, and she grew up in a poor family in Dundee. She became a factory worker there. Mary joined Hope Waddell, William Anderson and Hugh Goldie amongst the Efik people of Nigeria in 1876. The Efik people practiced human sacrifice when an elder died, as his wife had to join them in the afterlife. When a woman gave birth to twins, the people believed it was a curse caused by a demon or through the woman being unfaithful, so the twins were left out in pots for the wild animals to eat. Mary adopted hundreds of these babies as orphans and was a key person to get laws passed to abolish these horrible customs. She also stopped the practice of swallowing poison to determine guilt. She was a driving force behind the Hope Waddell Training Institute in Calabar. This became the largest vocational practical training school in West Africa for boys and for girls. Many of the students there impacted Nigeria. One of the former pupils was Nnamdi Azikiwe, who became president of Nigeria, and he also founded the University of Nigeria in 1955. Alexander Mackay studied at Edinburgh University. He trained as a mechanic and also went to Edinburgh University. On the death of David Livingstone, he determined to go to Africa with the gospel. Mackay believed that the gospel and mechanics went hand in hand together. He left with the Church Missionary Society for Uganda in 1876 and established the church at Ozambairo near Lake Nyanza. The king showed interest in Mackay's education and engineering, especially in constructing water pump during a drought, but did not like him when Mackay spoke up against the Arab Muslim slave traders. The king used to have ritual days of human pagan sacrifice with up to 2,000 victims, both men and women, whose ears and noses were cut off first before they were burnt alive. The king's son turned his hatred against Mackay's converts, and hundreds were tortured and killed. Eventually another king came to power who backed Mackay's work, and laws were passed abolishing human sacrifice. The church had been established. Mackay was called Uganda's white man of work, and even today is seen as a hero in Uganda. Annie Small founded a women's missionary college in Edinburgh. She was a leading activist for setting up the Women's Missionary Training Institute in Edinburgh, through which hundreds of women were trained up for the mission field abroad. John Paton was a famous missionary. He went to the New Hebrides. He was married and lived briefly in Edinburgh. He came from Braehead, Dumfriesshire, of farming parents. In 1858, he and his first wife Mary arrived on Tanna, an island in the New Hebrides, to plant churches amongst the cannibals. In 1859, his wife and newborn son both died, and he had to guard the grave from the cannibals. He was driven out by them. But in 1864, he was on deputation in Edinburgh, and he met his second wife, Margaret Whitecross. They were married there, and Edinburgh became a strong support base for them. In 1866, they established a strong base on the island of Aniwa. They learnt the language and put it into writing. Maggie taught 50 girls the skills of hat-making, sewing, singing and reading, and John evangelized the island and trained leaders. Most of the islanders, about 12,000, were converted to Christ. John trained them to read and write and discipled them in the scriptures. In his time, native evangelists went from Aniwa as missionaries to 25 out of 30 of the islands in the New Hebrides, having a permanent impact. They both retired in Victoria in Australia. Scotland also had an impact on the Americas. From 1730 onwards, missionaries were sent to America from SSPCK, which had been founded in Edinburgh in 1701 and given a royal charter in 1709. They focused on the native Indian tribes and set up schools amongst them. David Brainerd was supported by SSPCK, and he saw a breakthrough amongst the tribal Indians there that inspired hundreds of missionaries as a result. Robert Calley was a missionary who retired in Edinburgh as the Edinburgh Medical Missionary Society Director and is buried here in Edinburgh. He went out as a doctor to Madeira in 1838 with his wife Margaret. They realised that there was great poverty, illiteracy and poor health amongst the locals, so they set up a free health clinic and several schools. They established the first Presbyterian church there with 61 converts, but the Catholic priests called him the Wolf of Scotland, and they shouted for his death and those with him. Some of the converts were put into prison, and the Callies just got out in time. The schools and the clinic were closed down and Bibles were burnt, and the remaining converts were exiled. Next they went to Brazil in 1854, and Emperor Pedro II sheltered them because he admired the work of Protestant missionaries. Callie founded the first Protestant churches in Brazil with his second wife Sarah. Scotland has also had a decisive impact on the Jewish people, particularly through a man called Rabbi John Duncan, who actually wasn't a rabbi, but he later became a professor of Hebrew at New College in Edinburgh. In 1838, Robert Murray McShane, brought up in Edinburgh, and other Church of Scotland leaders were passionate to see mission amongst the Jewish people. So a small group went out to Palestine and to Europe to assess the mission field. They were sent out by the Assembly in Edinburgh. They thought that the most open Jewish community was in Budapest in Hungary. So Rabbi John Duncan was sent to them with a few others. He saw a breakthrough amongst the Jewish people in the Scottish mission that was established there, with many accepting Jesus as Messiah, including Dr. Alfred Edersheim, who later wrote the book The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, which had such an impact, and Adolf Saphir, both of whom studied in New College, Edinburgh. John Duncan is buried in the Grange Cemetery in Edinburgh. There were actually many more missionaries that were sent out, but we just don't have time to cover them in this particular talk. But the impact, particularly from those missionaries coming out of the revival movements and the home mission and then world mission, was phenomenal. The impact they had in Africa and Asia, South America, and many other places was extraordinary. They were groundbreakers, pioneers who broke out often hard soil to produce churches, the beginnings of a movement in these other countries. They established education. They established healthcare. They were key people in abolishing practices which were very inhumane in particular cultures. So even though Scotland is such a small country with a small population, it had such a huge impact on world mission and inspired many others with the models that they established. There are literally millions today who would look back to the Scottish missionaries who had such an impact on their own cultures.